Welcome back to another One Whole Life podcast with me. I'm Sean Francis. Today's episode's pretty cool. Samantha Livingstone wears a lot of hats. In this podcast, we talked a lot about Samantha's origin story of how she became an Olympic gold medalist, the parts of the process that created an eating disorder and how she overcame that eating disorder, and mental health, mental chatter. And that mental chatter was in her mind even while she was breaking the Olympic record. We also talked about her road to recovery and how the event of a child almost dying is actually what sped up her recovery more so than anything else. So check out this episode where Samantha shares her process and what she's learned through this entire process and how she's using that to help other people through WholeHealth Sport, mental health first aid, and SamanthaLivingstone.com. Everybody, without further ado, it is my honor to share with you this episode of Samantha Livingstone. Confucius said we have two lives, and the second begins when we realize that we only have one. We're all given one whole life. And when we find and break the barriers that are preventing us from living fully, we have an audacious attempt to improve mental health. One Whole Life with Sean Francis. I went to your Wikipedia, I went to your website, I kind of saw like everything you've done, which is incredibly impressive with Olympic gold medal in Sydney. And now, but like, how did you and why did you get into mental health after that? Like, was it always an issue? Was it family stuff like that? Like, what was the push?
I love it. I love that you're asking. Oh, I love new questions too. Yeah. So I struggled. I didn't know at the time that I was navigating mental illness. I know now because I know, right, as an adult, what depression is, what anxiety is. And so I would say that my first experience with depression and a depressive low was when I was 15. And then again, post-Olympics. So I was 18 when I won the gold medal. And then I went off to my first year of school. And at that time I got help, which saved my life. And there weren't, we didn't use the clinical language. It wasn't until I was an adult, right? 13 years later, when my daughter needed open heart surgery. And then I was traumatized from that experience, truthfully, because her surgery was successful, but the post-op experience was extremely tumultuous. So that left me then with an adult with this label of PTSD. And so healing. So really learning to accept and understand that. And we can get into you can ask anything truly, because that experience of learning to live with that trauma allowed me to heal wounds that I didn't know were still open, right, from my athletic journey.
Yep.
So that's really the catalyst would be for why mental health today is definitely my daughter's open heart surgery and my experience of living, having mental illness come visit me, I like to say, versus me living with it as an adult and healing. Yeah.
So can we talk about what happened at 15, or did you have to look back and go, oh, that's what was going on, versus at 15, not having any idea?
I knew so what was happening was I was in a toxic, abusive club environment.
Okay.
That was what was happening. Right. And so the coaches were talking about our bodies. They were sexually harassing us. It was really unhealthy. And it was all joke. Everyone would laugh. So as a young girl in a bathing suit with a changing body and everyone's just making a joke of it, I just went inward. I didn't have the language. I didn't know. I didn't really feel like it was so commonplace that I didn't feel like it was something I'd go home and tell my mom about. Right. But I went inward and I started to go dark, and my mom did notice. I remember her saying, asking me, it was a really powerful moment of do you even want to swim anymore? Because I was purposely getting kicked out of practice. And now I was so type A. It's if you gave me a to-do list, I'd do that plus more. And so that was so unusual for me. So it was a pretty drastic change in behavior, but I didn't have the language to say, here's what's happening, until much later on.
It's fascinating. So I don't know if you know anything about me, but I was a professional pole vaulter for a long time. And there's an issue going on in our sport where at the state meet or even conference meets, they weigh kids right in front of everybody to make sure they're good enough to, or like under their weight of their pole. And the idea is safety, like that's how they label it. But it's like, it's a broken old rule. So we're trying to change that for like almost similar reasons that you are. Like, why body shame the weight of, well, guys feel the same way. What I found out was that if they are perceived as scrawny, it's like the same trauma response as a girl being perceived as big. So yeah. So when that was happening,
culturally, right? Yeah.
It's insane. I feel like the shift is changing though, which is why I love having this conversation with you. But so when you were in that environment, were your parents able to help, or how did you navigate that, or did you just kind of go inward?
I went inward. I mean, I think as an adult, you look back and you're like, I was writing a list of potential people that might come to my funeral. I mean, I was navigating, suicidal thoughts. I was withdrawing. And I also had, the same coaches were telling me that they believed in me and also talking to me this way. So it was so deeply confusing, right? How could someone that care about you also mistreat you? Yeah. So that rumbling and turning inward, I just went in more and more inward. And my mom, she noticed that I was spending more time in my room and that my swimming completely plateaued. And I'd just given up I played soccer, club soccer for a long time. And so I had just given up soccer to like commit to swimming because these coaches said, you could make Olympic trials. They were the first to really believe in me in that way. And so that conversation when my mom asked me, do we even want to swim anymore? And I was like, no. And then she said, well, what about if we change teams? And I'm like, yes. So she knew, but she had no idea to what extent till I was a 36-year-old woman who was processing this. Yeah.
Right. God, that's super cool. You had a mom like that though, instead of just like a suck it up parent, it's just.
Oh yeah. Yes.
There's like
and she, painting the picture of like, she, there were 4 of us. My dad had a family business that he was running. She was like working 3 jobs, going back to school. So it wasn't just like so easy. It was a huge commitment and sacrifice that they made. And it's one of those moments that you felt like a cellular shift of feeling seen, you're like, oh, it felt like, time was frozen. And it felt so good that she noticed, even though I didn't have the words to explain what was happening inside.
Yeah. Like a mother's intuition or something like that is going on. So 15. And then when did you switch clubs?
Then
15. And then did it get better pretty quick after that, or were you still
well, so the seeds, I like to say that the seeds were planted. And so that experience, and then having, witnessing abuse in other places in my life, plus that experience going into an environment with that new club where the scale was on the deck. So that felt like, oh, that's just what we do. And that felt a lot better than someone commenting on my body sexually. So there was this, right? The change in culture was so powerful and life-giving that those other pieces that also added to what became a roaring eating disorder, where it was a mix. It was both and, right? It was a culture that was life-giving as well as had these components where it was tough. Yeah.
So, okay. So I heard eating disorder. So did that happen at 15 on too then, or
no, the seeds were planted. And it was what happened, 15 transferred clubs, was like the lights got turned back on inside of me. I felt alive again. Yeah. I felt like it was a place where hard work was fun and you had the music pumping and like you felt like you belonged, part of the community. You were proud to be part of this team. And so that experience, my times then started to just drop. And I was able to go from, a junior national level all the way up to making nationals and then becoming 18 and under national champion within a very short period of time. Yeah. Yeah. So that year before the Olympics, I was at that club team, but my graduating class had gone off to college and I decided to stay home because, the transition. So it's hard, right? Being away from home. So I stayed home that year and it was a trip out to the USOPC actually. That was, I think that like drop that spilled over, right. And became disordered eating, which just could continue to gain momentum, where they did analysis of my stroke and my body and all the things. And they basically said to me, your stroke is 99.9% efficient. You can't change your technical component. So you need to lose weight and maintain your strength. So that body weight to strength ratio, which that wasn't even part of the conversation. It was just like, you need to lose weight, maintain your strength, or get stronger and keep your weight the same. So that was like the two paths. And that then led to what I heard was, I'm fat, I'm 16 at the time. And my coach heard, oh, let's get stronger, right? Like, let's clean up our diet. And we just never talked about it. And we've talked about it since. And he just actually passed away 2 weeks ago.
I'm sorry.
So I am, really, like, it's pretty raw. And I'm so grateful that we had those conversations as adults to heal through those moments, because that was the catalyst that then became an obsession. You can see it in my log books where I went from tracking our, like my distance per stroke and swimming, all the things that are swimming specific, to then just really obsessing over food. And that spiraled into an eating disorder by the time that I got to school. So post Sydney.
Jeez.
Mm-hmm.
That's wild. Huh. And so after, okay. There seems to be a lot to digest in it.
There is a lot. Yeah.
Which is, it's just really cool though. So can we go back to the Olympic Training Center stuff a little bit?
Yeah.
Because I ran into the same thing where, we would be put in these meetings, and I'm sure it's probably super similar. And you would go, oh, I feel like the first time I went, I was like, I'm good enough to make it to one of these meetings. Like that's, I feel pretty good about it. And I left feeling completely defeated, because they're just like, you're not doing this. The French are doing better than this, or, and then they start, you got to get your diet. You got to be stronger. You're not fast enough. And then you leave going, oh my God, now I have this bucket of stuff. But little do they know, like, I decided to, get my master's degree, but then not go to work and live with my parents. And so you're like sacrificing all these other things. And then you go home going, I don't know if I want to participate in that anymore. That's how I felt, at least. And it sounds like you had a somewhat similar experience where you go, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you're excited.
No, it wasn't. It was disempowering.
Disempowering, yeah.
Comment, it was totally disempowering. So it was the same level of excitement and feeling like, I'm here, I've been invited here, and like, how cool is this? And then instantly the support around that world opening up to you and realizing, at that time there was a resident team that was living there. And so you're just like, oh, they do all these things. And for me, it actually, the worst conversation that came from our training camp. So, that conversation around my body and all of that was hard, and it led to a pretty not great outcome at the Olympic training camp. So I made the team, and then they brought in a speaker with supplements, like talking about, you need this, you need that. So we're literally like weeks away from competing at the Olympics. And I'm quite like similar, like I'm questioning, I didn't know people took all these different things. Like you have to take this before you eat. And I was just a girl drinking some protein powder right at 18, not knowing. And I remember buying, and I was on the phone with my club coach. And so I've since the national team director is Lindsay, and we swam together. We competed on the relay together. And I've said that to her. I'm like, please tell me you don't do this anymore, because that is so disempowering when it's supposed to be this magical time, right? Where you walk it in and feel confident. Yeah.
So, okay. So from there, and that was a training camp, and it was disempowering. Was the Olympics like a whole different level, or was it more of the same kind of like, oh, this isn't what I thought it was going to be, or was it bigger than you thought it was going to be? I mean, you're a freshman, you're a kid.
Yeah, total kid. And I thinking I wasn't. I mean, so the experience, when you say like Olympics and being there, like the village itself it was so cool. Like it was such a powerful experience of being able to be immersed with other athletes. And then the hardest part was swimming for a different coach, right? So you're training with this coach who gets you to this space. And then now all of a sudden you're like whisked away with this other crew who has a very different style of training. And that I felt like I was floundering a bit there and kind of finding my way, because I had been on national team trips before. But the hardest part for me was the food. So feeling like I had no idea what I was doing, because I had come from it was so regimented and controlled. And then you go into, foreign country, like they don't have the same kinds of things that we do.
Yeah.
And so that experience was hard for me until I share this story as one of the most powerful Olympic moments, until I was standing in line and I was like, I can't eat any of this. Like, this isn't on my plan. Right. And there was a couple of athletes behind me who were talking about the gluttonous amount of food. Like it was so much food, and people back home in their country, like they were having the hardest time being in that space with all the food choices.
Wow.
Right. So quite a moment for me of perspective. And it was like, whoa. So I think, there's just a lot to take in. And I don't, we get really good as athletes at kind of just like pushing stuff down or away and just focusing on what we need to do. That was my sole focus. And why am I back in the athletic arena doing mental health and talking about this? Because it was actually in 2016, I found my logbooks from the Olympic Village, and I had two of them. One was where I was like my truest self, I would say, excited and inspired. And then the other was completely, purely the inner critic. Yeah. It's really fascinating. I'm like, anyone want to study these? Like, you could probably learn something.
Mine looks the same way, actually.
Does it?
Well, and I always explain it to kids. Like, I gave a talk at the Reno Pole Vault Summit, which is the biggest indoor pole vault meet in the world. And I was like, a kid goes, or a parent asked me, how do you keep a kid from burning out? Or what if they don't want to do it anymore? I was like, first, maybe they don't, and that's okay. But if you go back, why they started because it's fun. Like pole vaulting specifically, you're running with a stick and using it to jump over another stick. It's just a really fun, goofy sport. And but it seems like, especially for me too, that's why I started. And then it was like scholarships and NCAA stuff. And then if you make this team, you'll do this. And if you go here, you'll do this. And then it was all this stuff almost hiding that core essence of why I started in the first place. And so I try to tell that parent, like, and it's so simple to say, but it's so hard to find, is like, just remember why you started. But like, if you keep that in the focus all the time, it's usually just, it's fun. Right. And
that's totally.
Yeah.
100%. I'm with you.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Because it's exactly right. And it can get so lost. And at the end of the day, that's exactly like the water still to this day feels like home. Like I just love being in the water, and I love competing. Right. And love doing hard things. So of course, right. That's what drew me in to begin. I love that you shared that. Did they receive it well?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was my first talk I've ever given on mental health, so it was like I was terrified the whole time and going, I don't know if I should tell you what you need to hear. Instead, like I was kind of like fighting that the whole time. Like, you might not like what I'm going to say, but
I can relate. I relate to that. So for 16 years, I told the version of the girl who journeyed to gold and I talked about like the hard work, but I didn't talk about what we're talking about.
Yeah,
I didn't reveal that because exactly what you're saying, the fear of, this isn't the Hallmark version that you want to hear. Like, this isn't the NBC special. Exactly. This is real life. And those, national team members, people who competed at a high level, like, it's like, thank you for saying that. Cause actually that's real. Like, that's really what happens. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm so happy you're sharing this. Like, it just opened up a door. So I was going to ask too, because do you think it's almost a disservice to not share what the whole Olympic process is, because there are some gross sides to it. There's some very beautiful sides to it too, but it seems to be sold in like the Olympics, patriotism and do this for your country. And especially we're like in the Winter Olympics right now. And those are the stories being pushed out. But like you've already shared with me, there's these ugly sides that aren't helpful at all.
Well, and that's exactly, so my first, healing, the catalyst, right? My daughter's open heart surgery. Now I'm trying to heal from this trauma. And then I'm realizing, that 18-year-old girl, like, she still needs some love, like from that Olympic experience. Yeah. And then I start rumbling with that question of, can you cultivate greatness and be healthy? Like, can you actually get there and be healthy? Meanwhile, in the Rio Games, watching, swimmers I swam with acting in bizarre ways, like their behavior, right? I'm not sure if you remember from the Rio Games, with the whole ordeal that went down with the swimmers, and watching that and rumbling with that question. And that's why I do the work I do, because I feel like that there is a way that we can honor our whole self and also achieve greatness. And no, it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to, have this, it's not going to all be pretty, right? There are going to be hard and difficult moments. I think that the part we can drop is the shame, the silence, the suffering. Like mental illness will be part of that story too. How we respond to it, how we talk about it, the supports that are in place for it. We can do so much to equip coaches, right? To with the language, to equip athletes themselves, so that it's not that their experience is void of mental illness or struggle, that they're supported, right? Yeah. On that journey. So yeah, I where I struggled when Michael Phelps and I were teammates in Sydney. It was his first Olympics. And I struggled with my silence, listening to him, watching him, go through the hard things that he was going through. And then watching, Allison, who followed at Georgia. So we didn't overlap at all. Allison Schmidt, who started to talk about her journey with mental illness. And I realized like my silence isn't serving anyone. So here are these generations of athletes coming after me. I had to really work on forgiving myself for that and understand that I just wasn't ready yet. Because I think like what would have happened if I, if I had said something, would their experience or journey have been different? So yeah, I don't think silence serves us at all.
No. And it's like, and then being the authentic honesty, is that other part of it too, which I think is really important. You were just talking about, where was most of your motivation coming from for dropping these times swimming really fast? Like what was that?
Yeah. Which one do you want? What answer? What version? So
I know, yeah.
how it started, I will truly say that like with 100% like authentic honesty that child in me had such wonder. And this was so lit up by watching women, Mia Hamm, soccer player, national team member when I was growing up, and someone I idolized, like witnessing women in sports, like display their greatness and magic was something that I was like, I want that.
Yeah. And
at first it was like gymnastics. I wanted to, have that be the vehicle. And then I'm like almost 6 feet tall. So that didn't work out.
Right. And
then soccer. And it was I played club soccer and loved it. And that became super political, it's a team sport, playing time. Yep. And I also moved through the water and had success very early on. So I think that my drive and wonder was inspired by watching female athletes. Like the Olympics were on pay-per-view back in 92. Like I was such like a young girl. And then I met at a New England banquet. I met an Olympian and I'm like, you're human. Like you're real. Like I can do this too. And so there was wonder and awe and this curiosity that just like, I want to know what that's like. And then that became, where exactly, did it transfer? It was like a slow burn into perfectionism and achieving to be loved. Like I felt like I had to achieve. Achievement was my armor to stay safe and protected, to try to be seen. And so that when I got to the top of the podium, now you're like, I just achieved, we broke the Olympic record as well. So like we win. And yet that didn't shut off my inner critic. So that was the moment for me that was so confusing because I thought that if I had just got there, then then I'd be happy inside. And so the story that I believed at the time was, because I didn't make it in my individual event. And then you start to talk to other athletes and it's like, like 1 medal is not enough. 5 medals isn't enough. Like it's nothing is, yeah. Right?
I call it chasing an infinity, right? Like if you're ever chasing something that has no end, it's always going to end.
No end.
Pain.
Yeah. Well, and that is the level of acceptance around, we can't look externally for that. Like that's the work, right? And that, so the youth sports industry, I mean, what I wrestle with, not even that I figured it out yet. So this is like super messy. I was a young girl with a dream. And if I didn't have parents that allowed me to have that wild dream, like I'm so grateful that they did, even though they're like, you haven't even made the swim team. You're 9. Like you're late to the game. Like, what are you thinking you're going to make the Olympic team? And they just let me have wild dreams. And I now hear parents so often disqualify and like put the disclaimer on, my kid will never be an Olympian, but and it's like, why? I wrestle. I don't like that box because I like, who knows what your child might be interested in. And then the other side of that is those that force it and want, like, right, the parent that is trying to drive it home and force something on the kid or make them do all these different things to get an outcome. So what's that path letting the child lead, I think.
Yeah.
And giving them permission to dream. Yeah. Letting them hold that open,
So when did that spark, was that around the 15 where that started to die?
Yeah,
and then like your fuel for going to practice was completely different than like fun and enjoyment. And it was more like having to get these marks, having to get these times, having to do other
stuff. As you say that and ask me that, so I will say no, because I actually really loved working hard.
Okay.
And like the coach, and there's been lots of writing because he passed away just a couple weeks ago, and so much reflection, so many stories of being reunited with former teammates. And it's like, he would try so hard to throw a set at me that I would just
break.
I'd bust, I'd just break. Right. Yep. And it was like, we would go back and forth because I would just I would give everything that I had to be able to just look at him like, that's all you got.
Yeah.
And so I loved working hard. And I loved racing, and I didn't feel the pressure until I had the gold medal. Okay. To then how am I supposed to walk, talk, act, dress? Then I had to perform, because every time you stand up behind the blocks, then you're now the Olympic gold medalist. Right. And that just felt very heavy. And that was a massive burden going into 2004 trials. I was not prepared for that one. So I think, yeah, so I would say, no, I haven't really, it hasn't been asked that way. Yeah, this is where you're going for me to say, no, I actually wanted to go to practice because it was something that I was chasing. So there was that wonder. Yeah. So
that was all through college too. Then you still had the love for those hard workouts.
So
okay. So it was Olympic gold,
Olympics done. And then that did not come back until I healed. So I needed shoulder surgery. I had to heal from my eating disorder and depression that was really, really dark. And that, so physically, mentally, all of it, I had to heal. So I swam my first year. That's a wild, trippy story. I don't know if we want to talk about that, just the logistics of it. I was erging instead of swimming because my shoulder was so inflamed.
Yeah.
And then took a red shirt year to heal. And so during those 2 years, I was able to work with Greg Harden, he just retired from Michigan, for 2 years. And I just healed physical body, healed from my eating disorder, moved into recovery, healed my mind. He introduced me to mindfulness. So awesome. I was so that experience allowed me to then, I feel fly. And I ended up transferring to Michigan and going down to Georgia. And that love, it was hard coming back from injury. I mean, really hard. Yeah.
I had shoulder surgery too, and I can totally relate. Yeah. It was rough. It was my top arm, which is the one that takes all the pressure from a pole. And it was I can't even hang up from a high bar right now. How am I going to run full speed and do a stick?
Yeah. And then did you come back in your career? Did you be able to get back to?
Yeah. My story is kind of funny. It hurt it. And then I had the best year up until that point. I got fifth at nationals that year, or US championships. And then that next year I was on a kind of a high, I can do this. I can compete with these guys, but my shoulder just wouldn't allow me to even hang on to it. So I went to a shoulder surgeon, and he was you'll never pole vault again, ever. It's just the end of your career. And I was I'm going to get a second opinion. Second guy said the same exact thing. Third guy said the same thing. And then I have a friend who was those guys work on old lady shoulders all the time. Maybe you should be a sports surgeon someplace. So somehow he had a connection with the Minnesota Twins shoulder surgeon. So he works on athletes all the time and knows shoulders. So I went and saw him. I was if he says no, I guess this is it. And he goes, yeah, it's a little banged up, but we can get you in 2 weeks, and then you'll be back vaulting in 6 months. Not well, but within a year, you'll be vaulting really high again. And I was sign me up, and do it. And I think that confidence he instilled in me, that was oh yeah, we got this. I've seen this with athletes a million times, and I know you're going to do the rehab and the therapy and all that stuff instead of old lady shoulder guy, And then
you kept getting it. That's amazing.
Yeah, and so that was that was 2011. Then 2012 was the Olympics that year, and came up in short from making the trials to recover. But then by 2014, I was jumping like PRs and,
That's awesome.
all over again. So yeah, similar story, but it was really hard to come back. Like, and it broke me in a lot of ways.
Yeah. No, it is mentally, the physical injury. And then there's this, which is not talked about. And in fact, so part of the work I do now around teaching and certifying adults in mental health first aid is injury is a risk factor for mental illness. I didn't know that. And that makes so much sense, right? I'm sidelined with this shoulder that needed surgery. Now you're taking away the thing that I love, and I'm going to try to control what I can by manipulating food. And right. So it just was this whole, it's not talked about. Maybe because we're just supposed to power through it, but that's the old narrative.
That's the old narrative. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's unpredictable, right? Like, no one talks about that either, which is I don't know, as you as an athlete, but you get safe in these routines of knowing, all right, I got my week scheduled. I got my month scheduled. I got 9 months scheduled. And then on injuries, what do I grab onto just to feel grounded again?
Because your whole world flips upside down. Totally.
Yeah, totally.
And then you don't know what you're going to wake up, right? That process. I was just talking to a PA who does ACLs all day, repairs. And I'm I remember vividly looking at the dotted ceiling and counting dots as I would get my scar tissue stretched back.
Yeah.
I will not forget that. Yeah.
I remember throwing a soup can because that's all I could lift, when we were doing
oh my goodness. Yes.
Yeah. I can do Campbell's soup. That's as strong as I am right now. Yeah.
Is your shoulder, is that arm stronger than the other one? Mine is, from all the rehab and repair.
Yeah, well, I was getting my master's in biomechanics, so I was very in tune with I don't want to have any imbalances on either side. So I'd almost do rehab on both shoulders at the same time. Smart. Just so, grad school helped a little bit in some aspects, I suppose. I was just curious about that motivation question because I run into, and I was one of those for a while where it started out really kind of beautiful and coming from a good place. And then that I'm going to be better than you kind of it's almost negative. I hate to call it negative, just more painful fuel, I guess you could say, for going to practice every day was helped me be successful in a lot of ways too. And I don't know if you ever experienced anything like that either, but
tell me more.
Yeah, it was I have a trauma of you're not good enough kind of a thing. So if I missed a practice or something, it was oh, you better go or you're not good enough. And so that painful thing got me to practice a lot of times. And when I got there, a lot of it was really fun because I'm like you, I want to know where my edge is. And if I got there, I was awesome. I know where it is now and I know how to push harder next time. Yeah. But a lot of those were that led to some of the shoulder pain, which was all right, it hurts a lot, whole bunch. If you were listening to your body, you'd probably take a day off, but instead you're you got to push harder. Someone else is going to be trying harder than you and you're not. Try harder, that kind of a thing.
Oh, just try harder.
Try harder. Yeah. And so that was a retweak that I had to have in my brain later. And I wish I had it sooner, but it was taking days off is training.
Oh, totally.
No one talks
That's
about
real.
that. Yeah, it's so real.
Yeah. Even professional. So I've worked with elite athletes, they're adults. And it's rest is actually rest is the best thing for your body today.
Oh, it's the most important part. Yeah.
Right.
Deload and then, yeah.
And even in the sport of swimming, which is so fascinating to me, rest is what you taper, you purposefully rest to optimize your performance. And yet, so that the never enough, absolutely. I think that part of my story was trying, just really, even though my dad loved me, not misunderstanding. It was just my perception growing up and which was my reality, which was I wanted him to be proud of me and articulate that. And so when I would come home, there was one meet in particular where I laid out, I was at a college pool and broke 10 pool records and out of 11 events. And I got second place in the 11th event. Some of them are still standing, which is wild to me. How many years later?
Wow.
Yeah. And I show him my T-shirts or whatever again, and he picks up the second place medal. And so you're he was joking. So we've healed, thankfully, that relationship has strengthened, and we've had some really honest conversations about the hard that I experienced as a kid. And that moment, he was just kidding. Like, he was just joking. And that was not funny to me. It broke me. Yeah. So on the outside, I didn't let that, I think I probably went off to my room, but inside I was like, okay, note to self, like not, I wasn't doing this consciously, right? Like, now I can look back and know what was going on, but that feeling of, okay, note to self, need to be perfect to be loved. Right. Yeah.
So do you think, so was that primarily from your father? You said that was kind of coming from where you learned that? Yeah. Mine came from my dad too, in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. And his was always like, you could win the meet, or I could, break the meet record or whatever it was. And it was always, here's what we could have done to do better. Mm-hmm. And we've had that same conversation too, as adults now, where as a kid you go, it wasn't good enough. It wasn't good enough. It wasn't good enough. Yeah. It wasn't good enough. And he was just like, oh, I you were just so into it. I wanted to help you in any way that I could. So it was strange. It's coming from a love, but interpreted in that,
I feel that as a sport parent now, like because I feel that. So you see things differently, right? You have a different perspective. So I have to be very careful to not go into that coach mode. And it helps that I know nothing about the sports my kids love and play. But I feel that that's real, because it does. And it is in the way what I say, like, because of my perfectionist lens. And to be clear for those that are listening, right? Perfectionism isn't about attention to detail. It wasn't about our hard work. It's none of that. Like that, those are all other attributes. Perfectionism is that belief that's born out of that painful place of shame of I'm not good enough, where it's like, if we just achieve this thing, look this way, act this way, like if we just do this, then we'll be protected from pain of shame, judgment, blame, right? So that lens, anything that we're hearing when we have that perfectionist lens on, is going to be heard through that filter. So if someone's giving us feedback, of course we're not good enough. Like that's exactly what it activates, which is so painful.
Right.
Yeah.
How, so as a parent now, like what kind of things are you aware of when coaching, or do you just sense something? I did a podcast a few months ago where they were like, well, unfortunately you can't avoid trauma. You can do the best you can, kind of like your dad's example. Like he was joking, had no idea. And it's usually later you go, oh, I didn't know the type of effect that was having, especially when you can't see in somebody's brain or how it's
totally.
Yeah. So like, how do you navigate knowing if it just, I always get to the sense, like if you're trying to avoid doing anything, you just can't do anything. You might as well just like lock yourself in a room and be like, stay away from me.
Right? Totally. Which is, that's exactly it. And I think that we're going to, some of my favorite follows on social media and like authors that I've read, they, psychotherapists, people that have studied this, it's like exactly what you're saying. We are going to, like, they use different language, colorful language, like we're going to mess up with kids.
Yeah.
And I think what's most important, in being able to communicate that experience with my club coach who took me to the Olympics, and how some of the comments and the things that he said, and then that moment at the training center, how that was so painful and connected to my mental illness. It's never out of blame, like he should have done this or said this, because there's no perfect thing to say. I think what's most important is that we create a culture within our homes and within our programs where we are honoring well-being, where we have check-ins, where we have this ongoing conversation, so that it's not like, oh, okay, now we got to talk about this big thing, but it's just part of this kind of everyday rhythm of our lives, where if something's bothering us, we know ways that we can communicate that and provide that feedback. And that was not, just wasn't present in my parent, like our home growing up, and it wasn't present in the club teams. A little bit more in college when I was at Georgia. I had a female coach who was just so in tune. She just knew, it was easier to go to her when you were upset about things and have that conversation, because that relationship was there. So yeah, I think there is an acceptance of, it doesn't mean we throw our hands up and say like, we're just going to screw our kids up. So whatever, F it. I think we are mindful and then create opportunities. Like if we know we miss, I'm like, so in it, like just keeping it real. Like I'll show up and I'm like, oh. And then I fight myself and I'm like, I have to be the adult. Like I need to go say, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But we can get super trapped in shame of like, I knew better. I wish I hadn't said that, and get swallowed by the shame that it stops us from actually. So it's, modeling what an apology looks like and being able to circle back, say that didn't come out the way I wanted it to, or I noticed that you're upset about this, or it seems like you want to talk to me.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That makes sense. I mean, it's kind of like the perfectionist thing, right? Like if you're trying so hard to not do anything wrong, you're not going to do anything. But if you, like, it's the same idea. So I'm just trying to reiterate what you're saying. But so you're saying allow yourself to almost like bump into the walls, like into the boundaries. And then when you do and you learn, you make a mistake, you actually grow and you teach the kid how to apologize, do that exact same thing. Is that sort of what you're saying?
100%. I'd even say sometimes you step over the wall, like, because you just do, you're human. I think we're in that grace of not making excuses for our behavior, honoring the fact that we're human. And I have a trauma history, and I get triggered sometimes. Like, that's real. And sometimes I have such levels of rage that talking to me here, people that see me in my every would be like, what? Like, how is that possible? And, if I step out, or when I step out, being able to kind of look at the situation, apologize for my actions, and then make amends. I think that that's an important part of, here's what I'm going to do differently next time. Like, I work on building my toolbox and skill set so that I don't get to that space. Right. So I'm kind of proactively honoring, like, if I'm feeling myself move into a space where I'm not going to show up at the best that's in alignment with my values, then I'm going to take a moment. Like, I've actually run around my house a couple of times, like,
like
hold on,
some energy. Yeah.
Of course. Right. Whatever works. I think that in teaching our children and those that we coach and work with, like, that, or lead, that actually, like, we're going to misstep sometimes. And so if we just beat ourselves up, how are we going to grow? We got to be able to rise and then figure out, okay, what could I do differently next time? And that takes a ton of courage, because you admit you're not perfect, especially for those of us that have struggled with perfectionism.
Yeah. I love your saying this, because even before the internet, we always had this, like, put your best self forward. Like, I was taught that all the time too, like dress for success kind of a thing, and say things that people perceive you a certain way. And it's almost like, since I've been on this journey, it's almost be messier. Like, it's just almost like the message I keep getting that's healthier. Like, be messier, be more vulnerable, say what you really feel. It might hurt somebody to hear it, but that's okay as long as you're honest. There's like this authenticity kind of between everybody, and everyone knows exactly where you stand, instead of trying to Instagram model kind of thing. Yeah.
Well, because that's where true connection, when you think about the hardest part of wearing perfectionist armor, I mean, first of all, it's heavy and it takes so much effort to continually put that front on. And never in my life did I feel that as much as I did post Olympics, right? When you're doing like the parades, and it's just this is before social media. So it was like going to the grocery store and people kind of look at you, and, even, to be honest, going to the wake and funeral for the club coach, he still was coaching. So there's this like celebrity status. And so I found myself in this space of like, I'm grieving and I'm really upset. And is that okay for me to be crying? Like, and I'm like, I think that with the perfectionist armor, the exhaustion of constantly having to keep up that, that just the walls and that look, there's so many places I could go here, but that idea that, like, being able to be human and allowing others to see us is such a gift, because it's so lonely when you have that armor up. Like, you don't feel connected to people because you're not letting them see you. Right. Because you're afraid if they see you, then what? Right.
Yeah. They're seeing a reflection of you at that point instead of like who you really are.
With the idea that you think you can actually control what they think of you.
Yeah, isn't that the mind screw that once you learn that one?
Yeah. Like, what do you mean I can't control what you think of me? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I've been reading this great book where they talk about everybody has a movie going on in their own head, like their story all the time. And you're the hero of your story and they're the hero of theirs. And if you walk into a different movie theater, you can watch their movie, but everyone's acting and looking and dancing a little different. They're not. Because their version. Cool. Yeah. And then you start to go, I'm the only version of me that I have in my movie. And like your version of me is completely different than anybody else's because of the lack of experience that we've had. And that helped me like tremendously go, oh, so if somebody doesn't have a high, strong opinion of me, or if they don't like me or they do, it's all kind of neutral now because they don't have the full story. But like my wife, for example, has probably spent more time with me than any other human besides my parents. And so my value of her opinion is higher because she has a more realistic view of what the movie really is.
Yes, that's beautiful. And that the imagery that I use is with that when I do workshops and talks, it's like an iceberg. So you see this story, like what you see is above the surface. And so for some it's more, but there's still always stuff underneath the surface that we don't know, right? Right. And we can learn about people when they allow us to and let us in. There's always more to the story. Yeah, I'm with you there. That's beautiful. What book is it? Curious.
I'll send you a copy. I can't think of the title right now, but I think it's
I
called
love learning. I love reading.
Yeah, it's pretty good. I think it's called The 5 Truths or something like that.
Oh, cool.
I dove pretty deep into Buddhism and Zen when I retired from pole vaulting. Well, I got to ask you about you doing that too, because that was the worst break of my life. So I was like, depression kind of came back full force. Didn't know what to do. I was like, what am I gonna do with my life? Now, when you realize you can't really pole vault forever, kind of a thing. Which
is there masters for it? Like, is masters? Do you have masters?
Yeah, they're like they're my favorite pole vault group to watch because
that's cool.
Pole vault's super hard on the body, and these guys are falling apart, and they only do it because they love it. It's like seeing a kid try it for the first time because. Yeah. It's expensive and there's no other reason to do it. And they just love it. Yeah.
That's cool.
My friend Don Braggs, he's 90. He just broke the world record for the 90. Yeah.
That's cool.
Age of
That's
90.
so fun. Yeah.
Do you do masters swimming or any of that?
I don't know. No? So I started running and I do lift and I lift. But, part of that is that I did swim. So I didn't touch the water and then I did swim for a little while, but our local pool is like with COVID, it's been shut down for 3 years. So I did start to get back into it, but I have not touched masters because I'm so competitive and I just no, this is going to be something I do for me because I love the water more for the meditative experience than for exercise, because swimming is so, I'm so efficient at it even still that it's not like I get way more bang for my buck running and lifting than I do swimming. I'd have to swim a lot longer. Yeah. I feel like that with biking, like I could go mountain biking all day, nonstop, but So college was like your healing started it, right? Mm-hmm. So what was it like being done with college? Is that when you decided like swimming was just done at that point, or did you continue to go after that? No, at the time, the landscape of swimming, so 2000, you couldn't maintain eligibility and also take medal money and like sponsorships. Yep. So I signed all that away to get my education and transferred to Georgia and wanted a national championship. I mean, I think that was like, I remember vividly signing the line of like, I will forfeit this money, whatever the heck it said. And I'm like, national championship. And that was not the case. It wasn't the best environment for me at the time at Michigan. So when I transferred, part of that transfer was because the culture was healthy. And also they were, a powerhouse nationally. And so winning, so we got second my first year of eligibility, second again to the second year at nationals, which is hard. That's hard to do.
That's hard to do too.
Yeah. Get second twice. And then I was like, no way. So we won my senior year. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
That was like the best. That was actually the other night we were watching the awards ceremony. I can't remember what it was for, what event. We've been watching Olympics nonstop here. And one of my daughters said, Mom, is that how you felt when you won the gold medal in Australia? And it was the Super Bowl. It wasn't even the Olympics. So it was that celebration after the Super Bowl. And it was like, because I'm not going to lie, right? I'm not going to, like, people want to hear, yeah, that's exactly how I felt. And I'm like, no. And I sat with it and I'm like, when I felt that? When we won our national championship, because it was this like sense of accomplishing it together. And I was so healthy like I was healthy. I felt free in my body. I had healed from these hard things and was swimming really fast. So that's when I hung up my goggles. And I was so young. Like I look back now and I'm like, but between my shoulder and all that was necessary. So I was able to swim at a high level, but it took so much, right?
Yeah.
I needed to do the prehab, the post, all of it. Like the amount.
You never stop training. Like
No.
I don't think people understand that. Like you go home and you have to watch what you eat and sleep and stress levels. And like, it just never,
No. And so there was no money in the sport at the time. So for national team members and all that, I didn't qualify for 2004 trials, didn't make the national team then. And I retired in 2005.
Okay.
So timing wise, I would have had to hang in for 3 more years. Like I just was ready to move on with my life. And I just threw myself I became a teacher and threw myself into my classroom and in coaching, which that was a trip.
Yeah.
It's very different.
It's very different.
Competing than coaching.
Okay. So retired happy though. So it was, you knew.
I was ready. Okay. I was, I'll tell you though, it took me until 2016 before I felt like I could watch the Olympics again, not wishing I had continued a little bit longer. So I felt like there's still unfinished business. And at the time I was just like, you know what part of it was too, is like, I had healed a ton, eating disorder, healing my relationship with food and my body. The perfectionist armor was still pretty thick when it came to like.
Is it still thick for you right now?
No. I feel like I'm aware of it. It tries.
It tries.
So
okay.
I battle with it.
Yeah.
And I have to put it down and I catch myself in surprising ways. I'm like, and I feel like I'm aware of it and I live with way more. I mean, that when your child nearly dies and you're faced to forced death, forced to face death, you like your world changes, So that just try harder. You're like, I thought that would work, So inside of that moment, so that completely shattered through that experience.
So let's talk about that a little bit. So all the swimming stuff, it sounds like from early childhood, it created some of these patterns, or I never know what to call them, trauma knots or trauma, whatever you want to call them, these behavior patterns. And then college, you were starting to heal a little bit to the most part, but it sounds like that experience that you had with your daughter and in her heart, that just kind of blasted everything to the surface to the point where you just I had no idea. Like I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but it's like, it just forced you to look at things that maybe you were avoiding or you weren't able to notice at the time. And so what was the breaking point there?
Yeah. So I would say that, that space between when like the transition that you were asking about of like, what did you do post-sport? The perfectionist armor was still there because I threw myself into running. Like I had to, and I couldn't just run, I had to race. So I had to race, not just a 5K because that wasn't good enough, but I had to race, half marathons. And even then I felt like that wasn't good enough. It should be marathons and then Ironmans, right? So that was so kind of like percolating under the surface to the point where it interfered with then, I'm married now. I'm, finding such joy in my life, in my classroom and in relationships, but that inner critic, while I was still nourishing my body and having that healthy relationship, it was so present in other ways, like through exercise. Cause like what's exercise when you're an athlete your whole life?
So was that fueling you though? Was that like some of that negative stuff that maybe I had that was like, all right, I need that inner critic's like, you need to go, you need to do more. You need to
you can't stop on a run. Cause if you stop on a run, then it doesn't count.
Exactly. Yeah. I was I guess that's all I was asking earlier was like, did you obviously experienced that too then? It wasn't all just peaches and rainbows, the whole time. There was this negative fuel source. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, that I like that you asked for clarity. So then when, you fast forward through life and I really loved, like I saw my career in education. I absolutely loved the students that I had the opportunity. I taught high school and through, getting pregnant. And then my husband he's a strength and conditioning coach. So he was kind of bebopping around. He was D1 and then professional sports. And then he wanted to land back in college and a job opened in Massachusetts, which is where my family's from. And so we moved. And that was when I kind of said goodbye to my career. I'm going to be home with my kids. And the biggest, I think the first shake, like the first like earthquake to my perfectionist armor was having twins, because I'm like, there's 2 babies. What?
Like, didn't plan that.
Yeah. What do you mean I'm going to have 3 kids under 3? Like what? And so you realize real quick as a parent of twins, like you can't make everyone happy all the time. And so there was some level of growing acceptance, but the deepest wounds were absolutely shattered. So one of the twins, so at her 9-month, like well-check pediatrician visit, they found a murmur, which then very quickly led to surgery because it was pretty significant. And so when her heart got fixed, the surgery was wildly successful. He was very happy. He didn't have to use any artificial parts, which saves her from future surgeries. But her heart failed post-op, and they were baffled, like completely caught off guard and confused. And now you're at the top hospital, quite frankly, in the world at Boston Children's. And you have this top team who's looking at you like, we have no idea what just happened. And then she stayed on life support for 7 days. And it was like a really, really, the most brutal of my life. So being present for her when, like the moment intuition knew, like she didn't look good to me. She was, just the way that the doctors were talking about her situation and doctor speak, you're kind of like, I knew enough anatomy and physiology. That was what I taught in high school.
Yeah.
Like I knew enough about things to like be really, like put me into a space where I couldn't be naive and just like listen to like head nod, but I didn't know near enough to understand. So it was this really strange, trippy space. So that, when her heart failed, that moment of like, literally there was this moment of, I don't necessarily need to go into the actual moment of trauma, because sometimes I feel like there can be secondary trauma from like hearing about it. Right.
If you want to talk about it, that's okay too. Though.
Yeah, no, I'm bebopping around recognizing too, that's also trauma, right? Like getting in the way of the coherent story.
Yeah.
So there was a moment where the nurse pulled me aside because I just kept saying, fight, try, like essentially try harder, Mia, like telling her, like almost like cheering her on. And she just looked at me and like caught my eyes and said, let her rest. And I'm thinking like, she's saying like, let her die, because you watch movies and TV shows. And I didn't know that the technology that they were wheeling down the hallway was going to save her life. And so let her rest. It was another one of those moments, kind of like when I was with my mom in the car and she asked me if I wanted to swim, where I felt like a cellular shift. And I went, okay, let her rest. Like rest isn't bad. Like rest is going to save her life. Rest is life-giving. So that was the first really, like, you talk about those deepest beliefs that are limiting and contribute to so much of the suffering. And then the other one was to just try harder. There was literally nothing I could do. Right. So that idea of, well, I should have done this differently, or I should have, like, nothing I could have done within my control. So I learned that through healing and therapy of like, there was no trying harder that is going to stop us from experiencing hard things in life, so, or protect us from pain. Like you were saying, like, if I just say the perfect thing, like we can't avoid risk, and life is full of these curveballs. So that was a huge, so those two kind of core beliefs shattered, like being in that space of recognizing what was happening and then the healing that happened after that. So the perfectionist pathways are really well traveled, and they exist in my mind, right? Like they're there. And also it opened my like eyes and perspective to just a whole new way of seeing the world, where I'm just not like, I lived my life, you asked about retirement, like on this treadmill where I was constantly chasing. It's like constantly the next thing, check off the next thing. When anything would happen, any small success or something like worth enjoying, I was like too busy and already on to the next thing. So it's like, there's no soaking in the moments. So, that's why I found mindfulness to be so healing on this journey.
Yeah, same. That mindfulness changed my life. That was a big one. So when you broke those core belief patterns, how did that feel?
Hard. And like, I think I was living triggered. So that was so traumatic because I witnessed the code. Like I was right 3 feet from her. And that experience with a history of trauma, right? Like why do some people get PTSD and others don't, like that, like it was nightmares. I mean, it was a really, really rough road for me. Plus she was in the hospital for a very long time and then came out, but on medicine round the clock. So I had to wake up every night, like every 2 hours, she had to have medicine so that she'd stay alive.
Jeez.
So that, how did it feel? I was like, I don't know how I'm going to function. Like, how do I find my feet again? And it was like a 6-year journey in therapy of slow immersion into exposure therapy, reorienting to what matters, turning toward fear and turning toward it, like learning how that's a skill. I feel like we humans, like we've got, like it's one of the things that we're not very good at. And it's hard as heck, right? Like being able to do that. But if not, then it owns us. So I think through that process, I found my way to mindfulness first. And then I would say self-compassion, like that came later, because I would still get so angry every time I got triggered. Like, if I just tried hard enough at this healing, I wouldn't get triggered, and then that led me into the space of better understanding like the neural pathways. It sounds like you geek out on that stuff.
Yeah, totally. Yep.
Been so helpful. Yeah. Helpful in understanding. So when you were saying, I'm not sure what language to use, I see the behaviors as like strategies. They were coping strategies.
Right.
Like that's what we did to stay safe. Because
exactly.
That's what we needed to do.
That's where my compassion came from, which I used to fight these behaviors all the time. Like, why is this here? Why can't I stop? And then, within the past 2 years or so, it like finally dawned on me that they were all protective mechanisms from something that happened probably as a child or in my past, always in your past, right? And they're still happening today, even though those threats might not be there anymore. So that's where, like when I was growing up, they told me that if you had depression or these things, you had it for life and you were stuck with it. And then, it was pretty mind-boggling to hear that you can change your neural pathways and you can grow and you can create new ones. And if you don't go down the old ones, they seem to dissipate over time. And it was like, wow, so you can literally change your mind the way you change your body, you can adapt. It adapts. And so that was like, okay, so I can deal with these patterns now instead of fighting them, which is just making depression and shame that much deeper. Like I'm just adding to the grooves. But yeah, sorry. So yeah, it sounds like we dork
100%. Yeah, I'm with you. Like I'm just nodding. People can't see it, but I'm nodding because it's exactly that. And I think that's so empowering. Like that idea that we can't change what happened to us. We can go back and heal. We can go back and honor the emotion that's associated with those memories and build those new neural pathways. I think that's so powerful. And then when when they're activated and we sidestep, right, it's being able to meet ourselves with grace and putting down that belief that like everything's going to fall apart if we're kind to ourselves. That's that. So better understanding like how perfectionism operated and that inner critic and the language around it was liberating.
Yeah. And I asked about like the belief, kind of exploding. Cause for me, the first time that happened, it felt like just weight was immediately gone when it was like, oh, I don't have to believe that anymore. Cause it was challenged, it was like, I don't know what I don't have a good analogy for it. It's almost like a bird born in a cage. And then when it finally realizes there's more than the cage, you're like, oh my gosh, there's space. There's so much space and I don't have to be like trapped here anymore. So I had like almost an opposite experience as you when you were like, then it was like 6 years of
so
work.
Totally. Yeah.
Mine was like relief. And then that like changed my relationship with like medication too. Cause I've been on antidepressants since I was like 10 years old, lithium poisoning, like just this awful past. And I was told I'd be on them the rest of my life. And then that happened and it was like, oh, how do I just do more of that? And because the
Mm.
meds never really worked for me in the way that they were always described. It's like, oh, so it's these behavior patterns and these new ways of looking at things and challenging these things that are actually what's making me feel the way I've always wanted to feel. You know? And so that's where the shift kind of happened to me. And then instead of trying to avoid everything, which it always seemed like, don't do things that trigger depression, don't do things that trigger anxiety, which is kind of what I was taught as a kid. It turned into more of, all right, how do I go into the things that trigger that and learn from it, you know?
Yes. With support, right?
With always support. Yeah, you can't do it by yourself. But and I'm bringing this up because it almost felt like I had to go to a mental health hospital twice to learn these things, which seemed like a disservice. And I remember sitting in there in 2012 going, shit, if I would have learned this stuff when I was a kid, maybe I wouldn't be in here right now. Like, why isn't this happening? Which is what I want to ask is, you're doing so much cool stuff with mental health. And it sounds, again, I feel like I keep putting words in your mouth, but it sounds like because of these experiences you've had and you saw that there was another way, you're kind of on the same mission I am, is like, how do we give these to people sooner and create situations? So can you speak a little bit about, there's so many organizations, but some of the stuff you're doing?
Yeah, totally. Well, and I think that what you're saying, like what's coming up for me as I'm hearing you talk about, like, how come I didn't learn this earlier? I think sometimes, and I've learned this from Eric Kusin, who's the founder of Same Here Global. Are you familiar with what the work?
No, I'll have to look into that one.
Oh,
I think I follow him on Instagram, actually.
Yeah. Well, in many conversations with them, he's just challenged the way that I see things, which is really, I love that. It's expanded my perspective and helped me see how, the way that we talk about mental health is reinforcing to the stigma in so many ways. So it's like, labels for me, naming what I was dealing with, like naming trauma, like naming that was helpful because it gave me a name and it made me feel like I wasn't broken. And then I could move it, turn toward tools. And I think that the stigma, like when we, you can only talk about these things in a mental hospital, right? Or you can only talk about, like, only licensed clinical professionals can talk about this stuff, or like, it's like those people over there have this stuff that they're and it's like, no, actually all of us, 5 and 5 of us, navigate challenges. All of us have mental health, and it ebbs and flows. And so when I started to tell my story, just like the whole, not all the parts of it, but a more truer version of that journey to the top of the Olympic podium, and included the conversation around mental illness and navigating that and what that looked like, being able to say, like, part of my story and part of my work is to say, it's all of us. Like, this is a 5 and 5, and it's not just it's the conversation cannot solely focus on mental illness. And I think sometimes when we say mental health, we end up, what we're really meaning is mental illness. And so this idea that 5 and 5 of us, it impacts all of us. How do we want to talk about it? What are the tools that we can put in place? And so for my, my journey with my own business, like I tell you, I really was like planning on education being my career.
Yeah.
Funny that
you still are, though, it sounds like.
Yeah, it is. I say forever educator. So is to take the high performance skill sets that very well as well, right? Of like those positive attributes that we know drive success and achievement, and couple those with well-being, like honoring who we are as humans and having a foundation of this grounded humanistic approach of, you are a human who's competing, you are a human who's who's striving for excellence and mastery. So because of that, you are going to feel, you're going to have thoughts, you're going to experience this inner world, and it's going to impact your behavior. And so I connecting the dots of like where the conversation is in sports, we focus on behavior and, the compound effect. If you do these small steps over time, you get the result you want. Well, like, let's back it up to figure out what's driving those steps, what's impacting how we show up, and having a real conversation around our emotions and, talking about anxiety as a human emotion and how do we want to cope with that? Because I think there is this, we can't, there's no room for that. I think it's changing when it comes to sport. I do also think that we have to continue to be explicit with the connection of why is this important to talk about. So in the work that I do, it's going to sound like a ton because and I feel very boundaried and very fortunate that I get to work with the clients I do. So at an organizational level, it's around strategic planning. So when I partner or work with an organization, it's about what does an initiative look like? How does the organization want to show up? What do you want to do proactively? How do you want to respond to these kinds of things? And then when it's with a team, a layer down from that with a team, it's really building cultures of well-being where like teammates can have real conversations and not be like, I'm fine, I'm good, and have that. I can't tell you how many times that it continues to exist because there's fear of judgment of others, right? Of feeling seen. And so learning language and skill set there that is both helping them as human beings as well as driving performance, right? Because when we're well and we have coping strategies that work for us, and we can perform. And then the layer below that is one-on-one and being able to work with individuals, which is cool because sometimes it's coaches who are trying to just grow their skill set language-wise, or it's athletes through the mentorship program. So that's the work that I do. And then in 2020, I founded WholeHealth Sport alongside of 2 other women, which is really specifically targeting, mental health and talking about mental illness and signs and symptoms and all that. So yeah, happy to share and answer questions.
Yeah,
because I could talk about it forever. So
yeah. When do you think a lot of this came from what happened when you were 15 in that really crappy environment you had as a kid, and then going into the new one and going, this feels better?
Yeah. Well, yes, I think that it really is from this rumbling. So this open heart surgery, I'm like literally on the floor underneath the rubble of my life. Like I felt like I was so raw and just exposed. And as I'm standing and trying to find my way, rumbling with that question of can we achieve at a really high level and be healthy? And it went from can to yes, we can. Now, how do we teach those skills explicitly?
Where did you realize you could? Like, what was
when I started to read the work of Kristen Neff around compassion, and I'll tell you a funny story. I'm like, I have winning a gold medal comes with a privilege. Like it opens doors and has, you have conversations with people that are in positions of power. And I remember being like, knock, knock, like, hey, I want to talk about compassion because that's the key to resilience. And this, at the time, the leader of the organization, he's like, yeah, right. I can't fill up room with that. Like, no, like I hear you and I appreciate this. And also, no, there's just not room for that conversation. So after being kind of like doors shutting in my face, realizing, okay, so maybe we can't lead with compassion. Maybe we're not ready for that yet, even though that's so critical. It's so critical to resilience. So it was reading the work of Kristen Neff. It was reading the work of Brene Brown. And it was really kind of digging into literally my husband works at a college. So I would go into the library and I would just continually sift through literature and find perfectionism, which the way that Brene Brown describes it resonates so deeply. And the way that it's described in literature in the psychology world is adaptive and maladaptive and this whole confusing. It's just not, I don't find it very helpful. So being able to sift through, I probably spent 3 years with my head in research and trying to figure out okay, so we can do this. Kristen Neff has research on how the inner critic drives cortisol levels, just putting these pieces together. And then I built these 6 pillars. So I started to map out, the work. And it came to finding mindfulness in a way that was packaged. Are you familiar with Mindful Sport Performance Enhancement? Which is such a mouthful.
Is an organization?
So Carol Glass, Keith Kaufman, and Tim Pinot are the 3 founders. And it's this curriculum that they put together, this book. And it was you read it and they're so inclusive. First of all, you don't have to be anyone and to be able to really bring mindfulness into the into your team. Yeah. So they compile basically all the literature is to support how mindfulness is connected to flow state. So we know the literature on mindfulness with well-being, right? Anxiety and depression and all of those things, and trauma, healing trauma, right? Getting in that midline online again.
Yeah.
So they then connected and made the case to connect mindfulness to flow state and peak performance. And so and then the work of Susan David with emotional agility. So I think it was this evolution of pinpointing the skill sets. So then I'm sitting on this and it's like, why would we not want to just teach this to everyone?
Right.
Because if we can achieve more and also like be healthy and have, that transition post sport. Now we're not rumbling with our identity because we know we're a human being who's competing. We aren't that athlete and that's all. We're a full human being. So then the transition. So I tried to go further and further upstream to figure out what can we put in place. Also, because I have 4 daughters who love to play sport. And I'm like, they've got big dreams. And I'm just like, okay, so how can we do this?
Yeah. How do we ride this ride better than I did? Right.
Mm-hmm. Knowing that it's not that they're not going to fall, but if we can stack the protective factors. So there's a slide when I do presentations, it's this a line, right? With a mark in the middle, and the middle mark is like issues. Like we're going to, whatever that issue is, whether it's mental illness, whether it is injury, a physical challenge, whatever that issue is, we can't prevent them all from happening, but we certainly can reduce, right? The protective factors can reduce the likelihood, maybe the frequency. And then on the other side of that, we have to ask ourselves, how do we want to respond? So that's also part of this, like, right? When something happens, what do we do? So getting clarity on both of those. So that was what definitely drives me to do the work, right? I mean, I think seeing the way that my 18-year-old self talked about my body and, here's like, you're at the pinnacle of your sport. Yeah. Like it's supposed to be this magical thing. And it was robbed because of that inner critic, and that experience.
What was that mindfulness course called, or class or book?
Oh, MSPE.
MSPE.
Yeah. So I went down and became, facilitator up there. It's amazing. It's so good.
It sounds like it's right up my alley. Like I mentioned earlier that I did that. I did a year of Zen I saw Buddhist monks and they seemed to be the most peaceful people. And I was like, well, I'm not peaceful at all. So I'm going to dive hardcore into this for a year. And it changed my life to the point where like, I'm constantly watching my thoughts all of the time now. Where like there's space between them, which that's what it feels like, where I can just go, I don't have to believe that. I don't have to believe that. I don't have to believe that. And that's kind of the mission of this like one whole life thing is like, just don't believe everything you think. And that's how we're going to try and drive this home. So yeah, that book sounds right up my alley.
You'd love it. You will love it. They actually have a podcast too. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I can connect you with them too if you want. I'm sure they'd love to talk shop. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So with all of this that you're doing, you do talks. So you go to places, you do talks. Do you go to like high schools or talk to kids or anything like that at all too?
Yeah. So I do. So the kind of categories of work would be consulting, in that that can go from that organization down to one-on-one. And then I would keynote speaking, doing workshops and things like that as well. And then the training, the component of like, train mental health first aid and actually certifying adults with that, because are you familiar with it? I got to get you.
I looked that up.
Yeah.
I think I contacted you like a year ago before I started this whole thing, and you're like, mental health first aid, should check that out first. And it was blown away that even existed. It's
right.
Pretty cool. Yeah.
And bringing it into the sporting arena. And so we do work. So with the WholeHealth Sport team, we work not just with sport actually, but also with educators, because teachers and professors are finding themselves in these situations where they're front lines. And they're like, I don't know what to say. I'm not a therapist. What do I don't want to go there. And so, so that work those are kind of the 3 buckets of the work I do.
Has it been pretty rewarding for you? Like, I would imagine, because I mean, it's where my fuel comes from with this. Like I gave this talk a couple of weeks ago, and I was literally just honest with people. It was like, I'm standing behind the desk and the person before me was not standing behind the desk, but I feel safer back here and I wish there was a trap door. And like, I literally said, I was just trying to be vulnerable and honest. And I was like, I feel safer behind this podium, so I'm going to continue to stand here. And they all kind of laughed, and it was like, And then as it got done, I was like, I stumbled through this whole entire thing because 100 people showed up. I was expecting like 20. And then,
Oh, wow.
yeah, my mind just kind of broke when I saw the people. And then
Yeah.
I had a line of people come up and just ask questions and share their stories. And I had a dad the next day say that after your talk, I was able to coach my daughter in a much kinder, gentler way after that. It was like, and what I've been searching for a long time is that fuel source we were kind of talking about earlier, which mine was coming from this like really painful thing, like this flight or fight kind of place. And then that was like, oh, this feels healthy and good. And there seems to be an unlimited source of it over here. And it just feels better operating from that place, It sounds like you're doing that all the time too, which is pretty cool.
It would and I think that there are times when that like hustling for your worthiness, like those pieces come back and just being reorienting. So that's become a practice. And I think that's something you learn as an athlete, right? It's like resetting, like, where am I now? Where do I want to go? How do I want to go along the way? Yeah. So that same, what drives me is the impact. And I just love that you are out in the world doing this and like you've changed their lives, right? So like the power of story, the power of vulnerability and being authentic and real. I think one of the harder parts of doing this work and the advocacy work is that people want to hear, they want to hear the story. They want to hear the Hallmark version. And so there's a bit, it has taken me time to adjust from the wide eyes and the autographs to this like inward rumbling, heavy stories that are shared after, like, not that I don't want, I will hold those heavy stories and hold space for them. But that at the beginning, it kind of activated the self-doubt and like, what am I doing? And am I, should I be sharing this stuff? And like, it's not what people want to hear. And I feel like I've been able to move through that now just with grace of like releasing the expectation that I have that they're supposed to act a certain way. And then the other part of that is when talking about mental health, I think there's a longing for like, just give me the steps. Like, what do I need to do so my kid doesn't struggle? And you're like, I can't give you an easy button. It doesn't exist.
Yes, not a training plan.
I can't package this all so nicely. We can talk about guideposts. Also, like what you said, it's messy.
Yeah.
And I think that is deeply uncomfortable culturally for us. Like, we don't like the messy. We want one side or the other. We want clean boxes. And so we, don't fit in a box because here we've had achieved like athletic excellence. And you have parents who are like, well, we want that for our kid. What do we do? And it's like, well, hold on. There's a truer, fuller story than what you're seeing highlighted every 4 years or every 2 years.
Yeah. There's a cost that people don't like to talk about.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. I have a question for you. So have you had people come up to you after talks just crying or breaking down or anything like that? And I had a couple people do that to me, and that was completely unexpected. And I just want to give them a hug, but I didn't know like what to say or what's appropriate. I was wondering if you had any advice on that.
Yeah, so that has happened. I think I go into mental health first aider mode at that point. So like I go into my put my mental health first aider hat on and listen, like leaning in with empathy and recognizing the impulse to want to fix, right? Because it's hard to see other people in pain. And I think just meeting them with compassion in that moment, right? And sometimes I'll say like, feel free to reach out or email. Or there was one situation where we talked about like what are the resources, like who can you talk to? It was a parent and a son. Yeah, so it's because you're moving them, like you're there, people. That's the thing that I don't know why I get surprised by it still, regardless of what arena you walk into, whether it's corporate America, whether it is high school kids, no matter how they seem to have it all together, there is always this. I just presented to faculty at a pretty elite school. And so you think, like we're all dressed up and I'm telling my story, and there's like a part, there's a part of you that's like, is this going to resonate with them? And then you come back to no, we're like, yes, because we're humans. And that's what you're sharing your human story. And so it's going to hit, it's not talked about a lot. So it's going to hit, it's going to strike people. So I don't know that I have advice other than, showing up, being, it is important to honor what you're needing, because you're giving so much of yourself. So as you're opening up and being vulnerable, the vulnerability hangover is real, right?
Super
Feeling
real.
raw on the other end of it.
I had to take a week off.
So that's about right for same, right? So now I know that I need a day before and I need 2 days after to buffer. So it's like part of how, what's required when we're going. It's not just the hour we're there. It's a whole lot more than that. So being able to be mindful of like a specific strategy. I know I got to get out and walk. I have to do like certain things that help me to regulate again, because it is hard. Yeah. So
it's interesting you talk about it. It's almost like recovering from like this workout's going to suck. I'm going to need a couple of days to recover from this one. It's interesting.
What's your recovery plan? Totally.
Yeah. And I'm still pretty new at it, because for most of my time talking about mental health, it's been to a camera, so there's not an audience and I don't see the reactions. I see a couple comments, but other than that, it's been pretty easy. So that one, it was kind of jarring, where you're sitting like, all right, I hate PowerPoints, but all right, here's how I'm going to throw this. And then you go say it. And it was kind of nuts. So, I have this theory that does it all start with self-awareness for you? Is that kind of is that the beginning of this road for most people?
I think so.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I think awareness is, I would say, like the way I talk about awareness is it's like the critical first step.
Okay. I like that.
Because without it, I mean, that's that's actually part of like when we get into the nitty gritty of like flow state, you have like, there has to be some level of self-awareness, right? Emotional awareness, attentional awareness of where's my mind, what am I experiencing here, before we can then regulate it. So I absolutely think, having that awareness, and it's not easy, right? Some things, it's hard to, when we're so used to running and numbing and like, if we're so afraid of feeling pain that I think it's hard for us to pause and sit with the awareness, because it's pain, that means sitting with the pain.
But it's like changing that relationship with pain can help a whole bunch, like I know I've said this in another podcast, but there's like I don't know if you're a South Park fan, but there's an episode where Butters, like he broke up with his girlfriend and he was sad and he was crying, and one of the other boys comes over and goes, "Hey, you don't have to be sad. Let's go do something." He's like, "No, I'm really happy I'm sad, because by being this sad, I must have felt something really good on the other side."
Yes.
And it was like, I'm watching this show where like Kenny dies every episode, it's South Park, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's the deepest thing I've ever seen. And so
it's so real though.
It's
that's
real.
True.
Yeah. And so that episode changed my relationship with pain in a lot of ways. Like I need going into it, paying attention and seeing if there was something on the other side that.
And it's in the internal messages. And what do we, how when we think about the physical pain, the burning muscles, like there's a level of acceptance there, right? There's a level of awareness and how to, although I think a lot of athletes maybe dissociate.
Yeah, for sure.
Learning how to harness the pain and not be afraid of it and move into that fight or flight space. Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. So I ask every guest this at the end, but if you had a magic wand to change anything in mental health, what would you use it for? Or the world, I guess it's your wand. You can do whatever you want with it.
Yeah.
I think people too. Yeah. It doesn't have to.
I think that it's like, if I had a magic wand, I'd be like helping, like, so individually, just loading us up with grace for ourselves. Because I think that that's what stops us from the stillness, is we're like hurt people. And the judgment that comes out and the shame that we feel and all the things that like cause us to turn toward each other and judge and, categorize, and all of that is really coming from that place of pain. So being able to offer ourselves more grace and compassion and realizing like we are human, and this level of acceptance for our humanity because at the end of the day, like that's our connection, like that common humanity is such a powerful, so I feel like that's like at the root level, which would then allow for more conversations with curiosity and less judgment. So love, and I would say love and compassion and grace. Can I do 3 things?
It's your wand. You can do whatever you want. Ask for more wishes. There's no.
Yeah.
I love that. How can people get a hold of you if they want to?
Thanks. I would say SamanthaLivingstone.com is the website, and then I'm on social media, so Facebook and Instagram. Are you on TikTok? Have you gone that route?
I'm trying. I'm struggling to figure out how to make it work. But
I didn't do Snapchat when that came in, so I'm just and I'm on LinkedIn as well. But I would say SamanthaLivingstone.com is probably the best way. And then to be in touch with me, you can there's a form to send an email straight to me. So,
and I'll put all these links in the description too, so people can find you easier and stuff like that.
Awesome.
Well, cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for having these beautiful conversations. Truly, it's like so important.
Man, she is just one of the most amazing human beings I've ever met. Let's talk about mental health first aid just a little bit. Last week, she offered me a chance to take mental health first aid. And the best way I can describe it is just think if you are certified in CPR or first aid and somebody has some kind of an issue, like they're choking, they're drowning, they have a heart attack, First aid CPR gives you the tools to be able to help that person in crisis until professional help arrives. Mental health first aid does the exact same thing. They're not teaching you how to be a therapist. They're not teaching you how to solve these problems, but they're teaching you how to help somebody in a crisis so you can get the help they need. I just find it absolutely amazing, and it was extremely beneficial for me as I have people reach out to me all the time. And now I have an even better way of understanding how to help them. So I can't recommend it enough. So if you guys are curious about anything in this podcast, head over to SamanthaLivingstone.com and her brand new venture, WholeHealth Sport. If you want to support what I'm doing, head over to owlmentalhealth.com, owlmh.com, grab a shirt, and that'll help out tremendously. Life is meant to be experienced, and curiosity will get you there. Stay curious, everybody, and I'll see you in the next one.